So let me get started, and then if people show up, I'll let them in and include them in the conversation. So today, I was just going to talk about kind of the initial stages of uh, doing a project and coming up with a proposal idea. Hopefully, I didn't just mute myself. I did mute all, but I think that was all you guys. So, you know, want to go from getting started with the idea that I want money so that I can do X. And it's always a daunting, for me, it's always a daunting thing to get started. And then just over the years, I've come up with some ideas of how to, the types of questions that I need to answer in a proposal. So I'm just going to do a list of things here that you can think about when you are beginning to do a proposal. And these are the kinds of things you're going to need to answer. So one of them is just, what do you want to do? Which is usually where everyone starts. You want to get money for some reason, and you have a project in mind that you want to accomplish. And so that's your starting point. Um, then you always have to think of what need the project satisfies. And that need, can be a large societal need. It can be an academic need. It can be a university priority. It can be about serving students or particular students. Um, but what you want to do is think about how you go beyond the need that you're identifying to thinking about how you're going to solve that problem. A lot of times as a proposal reviewer, I'll see people spend a lot of time justifying their need, and they will do a good job of writing about a nearly hopeless situation. But then they don't really get to talking about how they're going to satisfy that need. So two things to keep in mind is when you think about your need, you're always thinking about how you're going to improve the situation. So you have your need, but your proposal goal is to improve that situation. And as a kind of a fiction writer, thinking about writing fiction, which a proposal is sort of not really fiction, but it's a genre. You want to think about how everything you include in the proposal contributes to the plot. So whatever you put into the need, you want to make sure it's something that you can solve, that you can contribute to solving. Otherwise, I wouldn't include it. And then I kind of wrote the second part of this way. It's kind of a cynical statement, but it's actually one thing to keep in mind is how you're going to help the funder look good, how you're going to help them advance their goals and objectives, which I had put yesterday to make it a little less blunt than this, but it didn't fit on my lines as well as this. So this is actually the blunt form of when you're writing a proposal to a particular funder, you want to think about how that's going to make a funder look good and how it's going to help them advance their mission. You always want to think about how you're going to build on what you've done. So one of my mantras is that funders like to fund success. So they want to see that you have some success that you're going to build on and you've already done some work and that you've tried to do things. And that you have some ability that you're going to put on the line to advance your project. It makes a funder and the project, the proposal reviewers a lot more comfortable that you're going to be able to get the thing done that you're proposing. Then you got to come up with your project plan. So you got to think about how you're going to implement it. And once you have an idea of how you're going to implement the project, you start thinking about your budget and what resources you're going to accumulate to accomplish the project, and then how the money is going to be used. So I do encourage people to think about their budget as soon as possible with their project idea. Just start thinking about what money will be needed and how you're going to use it, because the budget really helps you define what you can accomplish with your project. I think it's good to go through the brainstorming phase and think pie in the sky, think about all the things that could be done, and then start narrowing down with your budget. Think about your timeline. When will the project happen? What are the steps that are going to be needed to accomplish the project? When is this all going to happen? And then something I think people don't think about a lot, they go through the need, they go through the project plan, they go through the resources and the budget. But you always want to be thinking about deliverables. What is the product? What is the project going to produce? How will the deliverables, how will information about the project be disseminated? Funders are always interested in knowing how you're going to advertise the results of your work. Even the federal funders, federal funders are answerable to Congress, so they're always looking for ways that you can demonstrate that you've done good work using taxpayer dollars. And private funders will be concerned about the same thing. They want to be able to advertise what they've done with the money that they are giving out. A big factor to think about is how your project's going to be sustained. That's more and more of a consideration these days. Is funders consider their money to be seed money to get you started, and then they want to see how that's going to contribute to something that will be lasting and will carry itself on. And then, of course, you have to think about how you're going to measure the success of your project, the evaluation component, and how you're going to document that. So this is kind of a big stew that you're cooking when you start thinking of a project idea. And there are some ways to get started. I hate the blank page. Every proposal I've written, I start with a blank document, and it just seems like an overwhelming stage of the process of trying to think about, how are you going to answer all these questions? Well, one way I get moving, and everyone has their own techniques. I use mind mapping. I like mind mapping software. I use software on the Mac called MindNode. But you can use stickies, you can use pads of paper, anything where you can just start putting ideas down. So this is one I just did yesterday, just brainstorming what we might do to use the trees on campus for educational purposes. And then I'll just start building ideas out of that, keeping in mind all these buckets, these questions that I had asked you to think about. So you might start just brainstorming your ideas and then go back and check the buckets to see how you're doing, and just keep building and building. And these things will get fairly complicated over time, but then, one thing I like about mind mapping software is that I can move the pieces around and make little centers and start figuring out my plot. Because really, and I'm going to be using writing analogies here, is that writing a proposal is really writing a story. You're trying to write a story that a reviewer can understand, so and that they can identify with. So you want to have all these plot elements in it, and you want to be as parsimonious as possible to make sure that everything you put in the proposal contributes to the storyline. And don't add any extraneous detail that distracts the reviewer, or in particular gives them something to focus on for a negative comment. So anyway, so mind mapping is one way to do it. If you know where you're going to go after the money, if you know you're going to apply to a particular program, the way I get started is just to outline the proposal. So I use my Word document, and then I will just write down, I will find something in the request for proposals that gives me some basis of writing an outline. And usually federal proposals will have evaluation guidelines, or they'll have something like this. This is for federal, I forgot which one I picked here. It's for improving undergraduate STEM education, because I'm most familiar with education world and STEM education, so I tend to use these examples. But within their request for proposals, they'll have a statement like this. You should be responsive. Successful proposals are likely to include the following elements. So really, they're not saying that this is optional. You really should have all these elements in here, and the reviewers are going to look for these things. So you have knowledge base for the project evaluation plan, the relevant research questions, a dissemination plan, and sustainability are things that they highlight here. Um, Most private funders and most federal requests for proposals now will be very specific about how the proposals are going to be evaluated. And so one thing to do is just even in the brainstorming stage, and if you know the funder, you know the program you're going to go after, outline your proposal using headings, using the evaluation criteria as headings, and just if you start thinking of your ideas, try to fill those buckets up with your responses, because and I'll be talking more maybe over the summer and the fall about how to write the big proposals. But basically, your idea, your goal as a proposal writer is to get the best score possible on your proposal. And the way you get the best score possible is by making it as easy as possible on the reviewer to be able to fill in their scoring sheet. All right. The other thing, and the other thing I advise people to do is just prepare what's called a one pager, or they're also called letters of inquiry or an abstract. For federal proposals, they might be called a project summary. I tend to call these your calling card. So try to put your idea down in a page or two. Usually a page is pretty limiting, but a one pager or a letter of inquiry is what you would go to if you're going for money from a private foundation. This would be your initial contact with the private foundation. You would send a letter of inquiry to the foundation saying this is our idea. And a lot of times, most of the private foundation competitions I see or deadlines I see, this is your first entry with them. They will have letters of inquiry or an LOI deadline, and then they will select people from those letters to compete in the general full proposal deadline. This is also useful in federal proposals to contact the program officer, is to prepare your one or two pager to send to them and saying, this is an outline of our proposal. What do you think? Does this fit the program? So, but it's also really good. It's a good exercise for assembling your thoughts and thinking through your logic for your proposal. Okay, so I'm going to go through what a typical letter of inquiry, how it should be structured, and go through each of the sections and provide some snippets of language that I commonly use to just start paragraphs and start sections to kind of show you how I think through these things. The general format is very similar to the buckets that I showed on the earlier slide. You're going to have an introduction. You'll have a statement of need. Then you'll go to something about the organizational history. You'll have a project narrative, a timeline, a budget summary, something about how the project will be evaluated, and then a funding strategy for the project and something about sustainability. And then you'll close the document. And that's pretty much it. And this is very standard format. The thing I've added from what I've seen, a lot of outlines for an LOI is the evaluation part, which tends to be very important in academic proposals and project proposals, and gets left out in many of the things I see. So, your introduction, I believe in starting right off at the beginning saying, I want money to do X. So I want this much money. Don't beat around the bush. And I always write proposals in as if it will happen. I don't say would or if. I'll just say we request $500,000 to do X. Okay. I'm not apologetic or at all. I want to give the reviewer an idea that they're going to fund this thing and it's going to happen. So introduction, you'll just start out stating exactly what you want, what it'll support. Sometimes in federal proposals, you'll want to state exactly the program that you're applying to, and sometimes with private foundations also. But you just have a very quick introduction, and then you move to your statement of need. So sometimes people spend too much time on their statement of need. Uh, Often they've really spent a lot of time thinking about why they need their project and why it's important. What you want to do is get into your statement of need quickly. You say the project's needed because of all these things that need to be fixed. They can be improved. They can be expanded upon. Uh, they will help so-and-so, or it will add to a body of knowledge if like it's an academic project that you're going to do research. Your statement of need will basically what you want to do is quickly convince a reviewer that this project has merit. And in the National Science Foundation, all of their proposals have two criteria. One of them is broader impacts. The other one is intellectual merit. The statement of need falls into the broader impacts category because this is really what you want to do is try to show that this project is bigger than just you. It's something that's really needed to advance either society's needs, students' needs, the foundation's goals, or things of that. But the thing you want to emphasize in the statement of need is that, and I've used language in these little statements to imply that we have the capability of addressing these needs. You're always kind of marketing yourself when you think of these. So as you're brainstorming your project idea, you want to think about needs that you can address, that your project can realistically address. And you don't want to, I wouldn't include needs that are outside your scope unless you're trying to unless you're trying to say that there's this huge problem, but we have the power to make incremental progress towards it. So, but focus on the things that you can really do. Um, and then it's important to, then the next section you talk about the organizational history. And the purpose of this isn't to give the reviewer, like a picture of how wonderful the University of Redlands is. The idea is to set up why you or your organization is uniquely situated to solve the problems that you have stated in the statement of need. So you want to tie all the problems that you identify in the statement of need, or all the needs need to tie to the organizational history, and then how the organization could help solve these problems, and then also what it would need from the funder to be able to do it better, or they all need to all tie together into, you have to do kind of connect the needs to the organizational history to the solutions. So you want to emphasize success. The project will build on X, stuff that we've accomplished in the past, or efforts that we have started. We will leverage our success in doing X, okay? So when you do your organizational history, you want to get past the background stuff really quickly, but then focus in on the parts of the history that really leverage how you're going to solve your problem. All right, then you have the project narrative. The goal of this I always have a standard format. The goal of this project is to do blah, 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 and the following objectives will help us accomplish this goal. Okay, so the goal is the broad thing you're trying to solve, and then the objectives are specific actions that the project will take to achieve that goal. And you will state things like, in academic or even project proposals, logic models I like a lot. If you can diagram out your logic model, even in a letter of inquiry, you could just say really quickly is that research has shown, we have developed a logic model based on research. And you want to show that you've thought through how you're going to do it, and that you have a theoretical perspective, if that's applicable, or empirical guidance, things that have worked, best practices that have worked. You want to get all that together as much as you can. And if you're doing a mind map, you might just do little statements on it. You might do a bibliography. I've maintained a bibliography for over 30 years now with all these papers and stuff I've used in proposals, and so that I can access this stuff to support any effort that I'm trying to write about. And then what I'm going back to the National Science Foundation because I like their structure of broader impacts and then intellectual merit. So the National Science Foundation calls this translation of the theoretical and the empirical into achievable objectives. They call that intellectual merit. So does your project stand muster in the reviewer's eyes? It's always a big, does it really? So you're saying you're going to have a certain, you're going to solve a problem by using a particular logic model. Does it make sense? Does it make theoretical sense? Does it make practical sense? Will it be likely to succeed? And also, have they missed things? That's also a big thing, is to think about, show evidence that you understand what other people have done. And particularly, and you want to use that particularly to say where there are gaps in what has been done in the past, or how you're going to leverage success people have had in the past. But you want to make sure that you show knowledge, and that you show that there's a logic that's cutting across everything that you're doing. So I'm going to back up again, that you start with your statement of the problem. You have your organizational history, which basically shows how you can solve this problem and the needs your organization has to take on this thing. And then your project narrative. You have a goal that's basically the statement of how you're going to solve the problem, and then the specific objectives are the steps you're going to take that will accomplish that goal. But they should all tie together, the problem to the history to the objectives, if that makes sense. And okay, let's go forward here. Then you have your timeline. So each objective should be turned into a milestone, or some sort of measurement of time. And when I say I love Gantt charts for proposals, this is a Gantt chart that I used in a proposal, which lays out when things are going to happen. And this was not a funded proposal, so they did not happen. But and this is too complicated for a letter of inquiry. You would have a very simple statement of a timeline, maybe like half a paragraph in a letter of inquiry. But you want to give the biggest thing in developing your timeline is showing the reviewer that you have thought through how everything's going to happen, and that you have really thought through the plan, and that you are prepared for any contingency that's going to happen. So there's often will be in a panel review session, the reviewers will spend a lot of time talking about whether it's realistic what the proposer is thinking about. So you'll have statements: the project will begin on September 1st, 2021 and end on August 31st, 2024. And the objectives will be implemented as illustrated below. Important milestones are highlighted. So milestones might be things as simple as events. If you're doing something involving students, it could be a workshop, or it could be publications that you're going to release, or reports. things like that. So it's what you're doing in your timeline is thinking about thinking about the products that the project's going to produce, and then when these results will be seen. Okay, we did the Gantt chart. Okay, the budget, Katie's gonna talk about budget next week, and budget's one of the most critical parts of a proposal, even though to admit the reviewers, proposal reviewers spend most of their time looking at the narrative, and the program officers spend more of the time looking at the budget. But the important thing is that we're going to tie this all together again, is that each objective that you state in your proposal should have a budget counterpart. So you just don't kind of lump things together and say, well, I want $5,000 to buy an X. You want to say that this investment of time, this time commitment, or this resource is going to help achieve X objective. Okay, so they should all tie together from the need through the history to the plan to the budget. And then some things to think about. We had a proposal meeting earlier this week, which required up to 50% match by the institution for for a proposal that is being submitted to the Department of Education. So you might be talking in your letter of inquiry. You might want to think about partnerships that you start putting together. So as you're brainstorming, what can the institution contribute? And oftentimes there might be things like they might contribute your time. I'm going to spend 10% of my time on this project. My salary is X, and we can do all those calculations. Katie will do all the calculations that's needed, but you can think about how your partnerships might work. Or if you have other organizations that might participate, there might be in-kind donations of software or equipment, or even you might talk to advancement and foundations about seeing if a alum will match money, or you can even do crowdfunding as a possibility. And then you get to your bottom line of how much you're seeking from the foundation. Usually when we do proposals, we're going straight to the money. We're saying we want $50,000 to support this project, and this is how we're doing it. But some agencies and some funders like to see some sort of match. The National Endowment of the Humanities likes to see cost sharing, and I was surprised. I didn't realize the Department of Education still wanted that on their projects, but they obviously do. And then particularly private funders will want to see who you're collaborating with and who you are, what resources you're getting. And part of this is that there's two roles in proposal review. Is that one is you want to see that there's a commitment of salary for all the effort that the project staff have. So somebody's got to pay for something. And if someone's involved in a project and there's no salary for them being committed by anybody, then you usually assume that they're really not all that involved in the project. And I forgot I said there were two. I will think of the other one in a second. But the other rule, let me see. I will think about it in a second, but that's one of them, is you got to see that there's a commitment. And my brain, it'll come back to me in a second. Probably totally out of line with what I'm talking about at the moment. So then you have the evaluation. You always want to talk about how you're going to measure your success or the project impact. So you will, if you have a logic model or a theoretical perspective or empirical perspective, you would just say it'll guide the evaluation. So, and you'll look at the efficacy of your intervention using some accepted methods, and that your goal will be to provide formative feedback. So that's feedback that you are gathering as you do your project. And then summative is something that sums up the total impact of the project upon its completion. So you just want, in a letter of inquiry, you want to just have some idea that you are going to be evaluating your success in some way that is objective and makes sense. Okay, and then a very important part that people often leave to the end when they're almost out of time in writing their proposal is to think about their funding strategy and sustainability. Private funders, and this is probably the second thing that I was thinking of, is that they will want to see commitments. So besides seeing that things are paid for and things are supported with time and energy, they also want to see that an institution has a commitment to what is happening and that it's a real commitment. So sustainability can be measured in various ways. It can be, if you are developing a course or a program using money provided by a funder, is the institution going to commit to sustaining it in some way? So sustainability can be a course that stays on the books and becomes part of the curriculum, or it can be like a program for students, or a new position, or something of that nature. So the organization has to ante up. So that's the general rule is that if you make a statement of something, if you have a partnership, you always want to see that there is a solid commitment there and that it's demonstrable. And then the other thing about sustainability is creating transferability is also important. Think about a model that can be implemented that institutions elsewhere, or it depends on the project. There's certain projects that aren't going to be a model that's implemented elsewhere. They're just products that will advance scholarship. But if you're doing like programs for students or something, you want to think about how this is a model that has transferability and things of that nature. Let's say, so to summarize, the big point is that everything has to tie together, be parsimonious, include things that move your plot along and move your story along, tie everything together from your need through your history, through your description of the project, through the budget, and then how things are evaluated. Because that's another thing I didn't mention, is that if you, for every objectives that you state in your proposal or in your letter of inquiry, you want to be able to justify that you're going to measure the success of each of those things somehow. So you start with what you want to accomplish. You justify the need and you tie that to specific improvements. You just demonstrate the ability to succeed, and you do that with your organizational history, the competence of the organization, your competence, and then you also frame your needs in terms of this aura of success that could happen if you only have these additional resources. You come up with a plan to accomplish each objective that will lead to your goal, including a timeline. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Document the resources that are needed to implement your plan. So you want to document the resources needed to accomplish each objective. You want a reasonable timeline that is achievable. You don't want to overpromise when you're thinking about your project, but in the brainstorming stage, which is this presentation is mainly concerned with, you don't want to constrain yourself too much and don't be too reasonable until you have your idea, because it might constrain you from thinking of some really good ideas. But at some point the rubber has to hit the road. So then you think about your timeline and the resources, the budget. You always have to look at how much the funder will provide. Think about deliverables and time and milestones. So think about, think the products that your project is going to produce. Like if it's a student project, how is it going to change their attitudes and their grade, their ability to succeed in college, or their future career plans, or like right now I'm working on the Hispanic Serving Institution application to the Department of Education. So you got to think about all the programs, how these programs are going to lead to Hispanic students having greater success at the university, and then how you're going to measure all that. So show how each of these deliverables will be evaluated and have a realistic plan and an objective plan to do it. I don't like ones that will say, you know, we're going to have a 90% increase in student satisfaction, as I think that's really hard to measure and that's really hard to predict. But I like ones that are, it's really achievable goals that you can demonstrate. And then the other side of that, and this is getting down the road more, is don't try to evaluate what you can't impact in a proposal. As I said, everything has to tie together. I've had project efforts where we're trying to measure things that are really difficult to impact in the project, that they're very kind of like higher level impacts on students, for example. And you got to think about things that you know, with something within, you know, most projects are 1 to 3 year periods. So you'd have to think about what you can really, how much you can move something in that time period and how you can really evaluate it. Dissemination is important. Think about you know, a specific, how are you going to get the word out specifically? You know, building a website doesn't necessarily get the word out. You want to think about, you know, how you're going to get the word out to targeted audiences and let them know what's happened. And then sustainability is very important for most funders, and it's become more and more important. So in brainstorming, these are the buckets that you're going to want to think about as you think about your project. You know, maybe lay these out if you're not used to thinking this way, or just start brainstorming and then see how they fit into all these things, and then use these kind of points to think about, you know, where you might be missing information in your project plan. And then the other thing too is start talking to people. You can come in and talk to us and sponsor programs. You can talk to your colleagues. But yeah, get your one pager together, which could be 2 pages, and you can also distribute that to potential partners. If you have a project that's going to take some collaborations, you know, share it with folks, and they will give you feedback. And you just start building your idea. You know, good ideas can take 6 months to 3 years to get funded, depending, you know, on the idea and the funder. So it's a long-term thing, and just start growing your idea as you move along. That's pretty much it from my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions or, you know, comments or talk about individual projects. If you want to set up a time, you know, to come talk to me, send me something. You know, I do that a lot where people will send me an outline of what their project, and then we'll set up a meeting and start talking and start moving things along. All right. Any questions, Christopher?
Um, Stephen, can you go back to that last slide, the summary slide, and
Sure.
maybe talk a little bit just using the HSI example as a way, just kind of to help. I'm just trying to envision how that might fit within the buckets that you have there in the summary. So I'm just wondering if you can use that as maybe an example.
Right. Okay. Yeah, one thing out there right now, we're applying for eligibility, so not particular, you know, program, but we do
Sure.
have in mind of getting funding in the future. So, you know, what we want to do basically is get funds to support our programs to reach out to Latinx or Hispanic students at the University of Redlands. And, you know, basically we are, the story is the way I'm thinking of it right now is that we're on the cusp of being a true HSI. We're the only requirement that we're not eligible on right now is that our percentage of Pell students is 32% rather than 37%, which is if we had 37% Pell grant students, we'd be in the Hispanic serving institution realm. So what we have is a growing, you know, it's been a recruitment push for 2000, what, since about 2017, I think, and we're building a larger uh, influx of local students in the Inland Empire who are Latinx. And so we want that extra push that the Department of Education funding, the HSI designation can give. So the need is that we are a small liberal arts college that is situated in the Inland Empire. We're moving the dial as far as our student population, uh, and we've been moving it, and we want to better serve that population because there's this good need for them. Uh, and you could get into, there's all kinds of needs that the uh, Hispanic or Latinx population has about, the families, oftentimes they're first generation students, so they don't have the parental support. Sometimes there's language issues, particularly with the parents. There's obviously many times, if we get into the Coachella Valley and many of the feeders in the Inland Empire, there's economic issues, socioeconomic issues. So these are all part of the problem, not really a problem, but the need is that we want to help these students succeed in college. So we need the funding. So then we can justify the need. We can tie that to specific improvements. So there could be a logic model based on literature on how do you appeal to Latinx students and how do you address their particular needs in succeeding at college and then graduating. So there's lots of literature along that. So you would build a logic model on what is needed. You would, one thing that I'm doing as far as our application right now is we've accumulated all the stuff that admissions has done since 2016. They've done all these outreach programs. They've done targeted events for parents, done Spanish language materials. They go recruit at Hispanic and Latinx oriented conferences. So you document all that. We have this history of we're changing. We're a liberal arts college that has been predominantly majority is its student population that's changing, and we've done all these things to support the Latinx population. Um, and then you take your logic model of all the things that you could possibly do. You might talk about where you need more resources to do more, what kinds of programs you could develop. With HSI designation, we can apply for, there's a large grant program for developing HSI institutions. There's also science, there's STEM education programs for HSIs. National Endowment for Humanities has an HSI program for faculty and then also for the institution. So you can start, depending on which one you're targeting, the Department of Education one, you'd be talking more about infrastructure, serving Latinx students better, and talk about programs that would go beyond what you've already done. So you highlight the success that you've had, and we're showing an uptick in the Latinx population at the university, and we could do better with retention. We could do better with financial aid. We could do better with mentoring the students and things of that nature. So you highlight these things that if you had this little extra push, that uh, a DOE, a Department of Education grant could give, which would be $1 million-something, it would lead to funding these programs. So then you'd have to talk about the staff time. We talk about, the faculty time, maybe administrative time, resources, travel. Let's see, what else can you do? There might be equipment and even funding programs like, the past year, things like bandwidth has been an issue. You might be able to serve students better if they can just get these resources. So you have all this stuff that you would take each objective. For example, financial aid might be one, mentoring might be another one, other kinds of support through their college materials, books could be another thing. These would all be separate objectives that you would have, that are parts that tie back to the problem. And so you'd have all these objectives that you're specifying, and then the resources that will support those, and then a timeline. I think these, like the HSI development grants, are usually like a 5-year timeline. I think you can do. So you would maybe have a year planning, where you're getting everything together, and then you talk about when you're going to introduce all these programs and all these initiatives and interventions, the timing for them, and when they're going to be evaluated. Each intervention would have a kickoff point, and then you would evaluate it at some point, get formative feedback back from that program, adjust, and then keep improving it. So each objective, if you have financial aid, you might have formative feedback while you're doing it and how it's reaching the students. Or if you have recruitment, you would be measuring all along how you are reaching students and the impact that you're having. Uh, and then, so that brings in the evaluation part. Your deliverables would be things like uh, um, going from, I forget what our exact figure is right now, what 30 something percent of, well, actually it might be more about retention rather than the number or percentages of Latinx students. You might want to have an uptick in your retention rates or graduation rates, or something would be a target goal. Or you could have other measures about satisfaction, or even outreach, and that you're reaching parents and the parents understand the process and you're measuring that. Those are deliverables too, that have to tie back to your logic model depending on whatever theory you have. Um, and then dissemination would be either getting the word out to relevant communities. And I'd like, depending if it's a program proposal, I'd like to see dissemination go to places where it's really going to improve. As a reviewer, I like to see, if you're going to improve retention rates for Hispanic students, well, don't present that at an academic conference necessarily. Go present it at a place where people are trying to do this work. So you would, for each of the objectives and all the stuff you've evaluated, you would describe how you're going to disseminate that. And then the hardest part is sustaining the effort. So we developed this HSI. Um, you might, we develop this plan, we get the Department of Education money. They would want to see that the whatever funding they put into it is going to be sustained. The programs are going to be sustained beyond the 5-year funding period, and you might have to show evidence of ways that the program would pay for itself out of tuition dollars or fundraising, possibly from advancement. It might also involve, I'm trying to think of, I mean, you can talk about funding sources that you can access, except they don't like you to say that you would keep applying to the same program over and over again. They'd like you to have new ways of getting the funding, or that the institution is going to make the commitment in some way. Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with how the recruitment works, and particularly with the Hispanic population, and how we would sustain the efforts. But they would want to see, there might be letters in the proposal saying that, yeah, if we create a position to handle this that's funded by the project for 4 years or whatever, we will sustain that position beyond the project period. That's pretty much a buckshot which I hope, was that useful at all?
Yeah, that's very helpful. I mean, it's always nice to be able to put an example to the concept. And so I'm familiar with the HSI. So when you mentioned it, I was just trying to envision in my head how that would work. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we might bring in community partners. I mean, I just saw that the U of R released its community report. So, Yeah, for a proposal like that, you'd probably want to get as many partners as you could and then show their contributions and then, to each objective. So yeah, but it's it's a story that you try to figure out for each particular proposal that you're putting forth. And, but thanks. Yeah, okay. Was there another question?
Hi, Steve. I have a quick
Hi,
question. First of all, thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Are you available during the summer months, like from June to August, if I were to reach out to you for any advice?
Yes, yes, I'm here all the time.
Okay, thank you. I would
Yeah,
really
yeah,
appreciate that.
except when I'm on vacation, which happens sometimes in the summer. But yeah, I'm around, and it's me and Katie Milsom work together, and I do kind of like the advanced work, the idea formulation, and Katie works on the budgets, and then we get the packages put together.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Sure.
much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. It's really hard to, it's really an iterative process. Come in with your idea. We'll work on something and you get your proposal out there. Expect to get rejected. Particularly these days, it's very competitive. Uh, the mantra is to revise and resubmit and keep
Sure,
doing that. Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming today.
Oh, no, yeah, I actually do have two projects in mind, and they're not something that I thought of today. It has been a couple of years. And I've just never had the time to, put things together, and especially budget is a huge challenge for me. And yeah, I would really appreciate your advice and Katie's help on this.
Sure. Great.
Thank
And
you.
what I'd like to set up in the future, I mean, I've just started these little talks as a way to get moving, but I would like to kind of like set up a support group in certain ways, so that as people work on things, we can get together and just talk about your progress. And there are a number of people at the university who have gotten funding, and so I'd like to bring them into the fold also, so we can leverage our expertise.
Yeah, I think that'll be great. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. All right. Anything else? But yeah, just send your ideas. Yeah, we can start talking about them. It takes a while to formulate these things, and we can start looking at funders. Um, and yeah, once you have an idea formulated, and then you identify a few funders, you can start outlining your proposals and letters more clearly.
Yeah, thank you.
Steve,
Okay.
I was just going to ask a slightly different question related to this. So, you know that I have this project with my co-editor that we've submitted a couple times. We're planning to submit again this year. I think we're meeting later this month.
Uh-huh.
So I know that you were talking about the idea of, I forget what you call it, but you get funding from, multiple sources are helping out with the project.
Yeah.
Um, This is probably not the time for that question, but how would we take the first steps in finding those other funders?
Well, you just ask. That depends on what we're talking about. I mean, for example, like your project where you had the NEH proposal and you had this publisher that was willing to take on your project. That's kind of and that's an example of a kind of like an in-kind thing where you have somebody lined up already.
Oh,
Um, if you know if you have like an HSI project or there's some community organization that can contribute to help uh, students with mentoring or financial resources or things of that nature, you would invite them in and ask them to commit. So what I what you want to avoid is saying, I'm also applying for funding from uh, this other foundation that they're if I get that funding, they're going to pay for this piece of the work. What you want to do is have solid commitments from groups that will either like provide matching money, or they'll provide resources or contributions, if you get the proposal. And publishing a book, for example, is one of those kinds of commitments. I don't know. Is that helpful, or I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I was asking a slightly different question, I think,
Okay.
but that's very helpful. I hadn't thought about the publisher as sort of like one more piece of that sort. But I see but it also is helpful because I was thinking, okay, well, where do we go look for other funding and apply for it? But I can see that that's not really what you meant.
It depends on the project, what the project goal is. Did you have I forgot was this the book project or?
Yeah, this is the same, the same old ancient old novel that we're hoping to get published.
Yeah. It depends on the resources. I mean, we talked about, there were, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Huntington is actually a collaborator sort of on that because they have the book, right?
We have the book, and I've worked with a little bit with them. I mean, pandemic and stuff have gotten in the way, but
Yeah.
I've worked with them some. I've also worked with the American Antiquarian Society, which also holds copies of this book.
Yeah, but a collaboration can be as simple as if the Huntington says the librarian will spend X number of hours with you, that's kind of like a contribution. Or if they will transcribe it or provide an electronic copy, or if a company says they would provide the software to do we had the OCR stuff we talked about at one time. The Department of Ed one, we were talking about contributions of iPads, and we were talking about school districts, the time they spend supervising like interns and stuff like that. Those are collaborations that become measurable contributions by collaborators. Uh, so, yeah, some of it's just thinking about where you need your resources, what resources you need that would help you succeed, and then who might be able to provide them. And then it's just a matter of getting them to commit to something. Like with me, with spatial stuff, Esri is always the thing we try to leverage Esri, and get people to commit to do stuff or give things or things of that nature. But we can talk more about that.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Well, if you have other questions, let me know. Yeah, we can. I guess it's 1:00 right now, so it's time to close. But yeah, please contact me, and we'll get working on your projects. Next week, Katie's going to be talking about budget, and that's always a good thing to start getting familiar with, because the budgets really help focus projects. And
will the slides from today be available for us to look at?
yeah, I will post everything. It's up. Everything I've done is up on the sponsored programs page. There's a presentations tab. So I'll get that up there either later today or sometime this weekend.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
All right. Well, take care. Good seeing you
Thank you,
guys and
Stephen.
meeting you.
Thank you.
All right. Uh-huh.